It seems like every time I expect to have a certain kind of reaction to a game, my actual impressions of it go in the exact opposite direction. I expected to like Dark Souls 2, but I ended up hating it enough to make an hour-long video of my disdain of it. I also expected to get bored of Mass Effect 1 within 5 or so hours of playing it, but having completed the game, most of its side quests, and even having obtained the platinum, I have nothing but love for this interstellar classic. Due to my own proclivities, I find that RPGs with too much dialogue or too many things to read enrapture me for a few hours before inevitably being placed high on my pile of shame. I just don't have the patience for following a 200-hour long story when other gameplay mechanics simply aren't engaging. But that's not what happened with Mass Effect, and in this video I'll try to lay out all the reasons why Mass Effect is the best RPG I have ever played. The story of Mass Effect had me hooked right from the start. After creating a custom Shepard, a mistake I'll never make again, and being rushed to Eden Prime only to see one of my companions be killed in action before having a new one join me almost immediately, I knew I was in for a ride. I must admit that after that initial run-in with Saren and his army of Geth, I wasn't sold on him as a villain, but the intrigue built around the visions and the sheer scale of the universe BioWare had managed to build had me in awe. Going to the Citadel right after Eden Prime gives the players an opportunity to learn about the diverse races and their unique characteristics. Even the more minor, non-council races such as the Elcor have idiosyncrasies, the unique way in which they emote. Sure, I could argue that the side quests that you're doing on here don't really have much depth to them, regularly being fetch quests that have you going from point A to point B and then returning. But when the stories behind these quests are so intriguing and the setting you're running around in is so full of mystery itself, I'd keep an eye on those keywords if I were you. That argument doesn't hold substantial weight. On the Citadel, you also start assembling your crew, and boy do I love this crew. Sometimes the crew members can come across as exposition devices who add to your knowledge about the different races they represent. Tali in particular falls in this trap, but each of them have their own stories as well. And how can you complain when Garrus looks this damn handsome? In its initial phases, the story can seem a bit rushed, with Shepard being declared a scepter by the judges on The Voice who wouldn't believe about the existence of an ancient alien race unless they hit them in the face, which they did in my playthrough. And the story would probably benefit from having a longer prologue where we go on a mission or two with Shepard, Caden and Jenkins, but I can't really complain when the game opens up the entire universe to you and allows you to choose your own adventure once this section is over. And so I found myself with my first major decision in the game, and it wasn't even limited to the Paragon and Renegade system. Did I want to go to the frozen lands of Novaria, the colony of Feroz, or the mining systems of Therium first? Well, for me the choice was simple. None of them. I decided to explore the different star systems first. Can't save the galaxy if I'm not ridiculously overleveled. The side quests here are of vastly varying quality. Since this section is about the story and the story alone, I'll just tell you about the ones I found most interesting. Garrus' loyalty quest was one of my favorites of the game. It was simple, but it gave me a deeper understanding into who this beautiful boy was. It did culminate in me teaching him the rather dubious lesson that murder is good, so maybe I made some wrong choices along the way. Can't really be sure. Another quest that I really enjoyed was one that I just sort of stumbled upon. While going from system to system exploring the galaxy, I came across a seemingly empty space station. On further investigation, I found a man hooked up to a life support system. Exploring the station a little more, I found logs from when the station was more populated, and I learned that the man had been a vegetable for a while now, and there was no saving him, and that his wife, unable to accept this reality, slowly lost her sanity, desperately trying to find a cure. That's when his wife came at me and my squad, guns a-blazing, and I was forced to kill her. I then decided to pull the plug on the man's life support system because I felt like he deserved peace after all that had happened. The quest was rather simple in structure, but its emotional ramifications and the ethical considerations of euthanasia still have me thinking about it. After planet hopping for a while, I decided to land on Feroz, and promptly got turned into the colony's savior after accidentally solving all of their problems. I got lost in the sewers and just sort of did everything and came back up to collect the rewards. After getting a pat on the back and a whole bunch of credits, Shepard made their way to the Exogeny headquarters, where we were met with the age-old message of corporations bad. After a bit of exposition about Exogeny, we returned to the Zoo's Hope colony to find that the experiments of the corporation on the Thorian, a peaceful plant that dabbles in mind control, have led the colonists to turn against us. Now we have a choice. Either we can kill all the colonists that stand in our way, or we can use an anti-thorian gas to paralyze them till we deal with the mandrake itself. Shiv can also stab these colonists into unconsciousness, but some are more resistant to this than others. Seriously, Alicia, let me save you. Shiv finds the Thorian, making quick work of it and saving an Asari who talks like an LA influencer.
Every action sends ripples across the galaxy. Every idea must touch another mind to live.
Peros was my favorite lead of the three because your actions on the planet determine the fates of the colonists. If you make the effort of saving the colonists, fixing their water systems, and give the people a leader, Zoo's hope can heal itself. Get too trigger happy though, and it'll be in ruins. The next arc I followed took me to Therium, where I got to recruit Liara, who soon became an irreplaceable part of my squad. She goes down in a few hits, but her biotic prowess is useful to have. Plus, she taught me a lot about the enigmatic Asari. These age-ended beings, their unique mating rituals, and their connection to the universe was fascinating. So fascinating, in fact, that I decided to romance Liara to learn about it in intimate detail. At least that's the excuse I used when a friend walked in on me trying to skip the rather steamy cutscene that this romance path culminates in. Video games are a mature medium of storytelling, after all. After calling the council only to cut the line once again, God, I'm such a renegade, I went to Vermeer, where Saren had set up a new Krogan breeding facility. This led to some internal conflict in the group. See, the Krogan were essentially neutered by the Salarians, and Rex, reasonably, sought the cure to this genophage that would allow his kind to repopulate. Depending on your decisions here, you might have to murder Rex. I, thankfully, had formed a deeper bond with him already and had also invested sufficiently in charm and intimidate to prevent this eventuality. Leading the assault on Saren's facility has you make other tough decisions as well. Depending on how generous you're feeling, you can either make life easier for yourself or draw more attention to yourself to save the Salarian army. The Salarians who were captured previously can also be found here, and some of them can be saved, while others, having undergone an indoctrination procedure, will attack you if you let them out of their cages. Fight through the facility, and you will also have to decide whether you want to save Caden or Ashley. There's no way to save both, which adds pressure to the situation and forces you to make a really tough decision. Or at least it would have been a tough decision if I didn't find both of them to be annoying. Caden is a biotech major, but unlike other biotech majors, he has no career prospects because I always drop him off at the Normandy. The only reason I even chose him over Ashley was because his backstory was more interesting, and also because Ashley was borderline a space racist. On Vermeer, you also learn that Saren's ship, Sovereign, which is capable of mind control, isn't actually a ship at all. It's one of the Reapers. The Reapers are the main antagonists of the whole trilogy, and they are scary. Every 50,000 years, the Reapers destroy all living organisms in the universe, and the visions Shepard saw were of them in action. What makes the concept of the Reapers even more terrifying for me is that they reside in deep space. The space beyond space. Something about them being able to survive unseen in a corner of the universe that nobody can even traverse, waiting to deliver the next mass extinction, is simply frightening. After fighting Saren in his best Green Goblin cosplay, man couldn't even get the color right, I returned to the ship with one teammate down and finally made my way to Novaria. This snowy planet features a very cool space hotel, as well as a research facility straight out of the Aliens franchise. These sentient insects, the Arachni, are terrorizing a small team in the research facility, and you have to fight through them to get to the Asari matriarch, Benazia. If you have Liara on your team, there's some unique dialogue as she's forced to slay her own mother. You can also choose to give the Arachni Queen a bath here. Oh wait, it's an acid bath. I'm sure that's good for exfoliation though. Whether you choose to release or murder the Arachni Queen, there are no real consequences just yet. In fact, I don't know if there will be any real consequences at all since I haven't finished the other two games. And this is a bit of an issue with some of the major choices you make in this game. Their implications may not be apparent till you play the later installments. Then again, Mass Effect isn't meant to be a self-contained experience, so this is by design. After all of this universe trotting, Shepard finally puts everything together and decides to follow Saren to a lost planet known as Elos to locate something called the Conduit. But since the Council doesn't believe them, Shepard is put on house arrest till Captain Anderson has a talk with the human ambassador. Oh wait, he just stabs him. Okay, never mind. Back on the Normandy, Shepard races to Elos to find remnants of the ancient Prothean civilization. A Prothean VI reveals more about the Reapers and the fall of the Protheans. The big twist here is something that legitimately caught me off guard. I had assumed that the Citadel had been built by the Protheans, but as it turns out, the Citadel is actually a mass relay that allows the Reapers to come to the galaxy in the first place, and the Keepers play an integral role in this process. Told you not to trust them. Since the Citadel essentially has all the important information on all the alien races, harvesting this information helps the Reapers enact their mass extinctions. The Protheans altered the signal on the Citadel to prevent the Keepers from sending a message to the Reapers, but the Reapers left Sovereign behind, and it managed to indoctrinate Saren. Now Shepard must return to the Citadel to stop Saren from reactivating the signal. Using the conduit, a mass relay linked to the Citadel, Shepard and his squad reach the Presidium, destroying the Mako in the process. Thank God. Fighting through armies of Geths, Shepard eventually reaches Saren. Here I was able to talk Saren into shooting himself. This went against all my instincts as a psych major, but ultimately didn't have much consequence since Sovereign used Saren and turned him into a ridiculously tough Geth stalker type enemy that I was forced to fight. Outside, a battle between the Sovereign and the Human Alliance forces raged on, with the army being able to defeat the Reaper. After the taxing battle, there is one final decision for Shepard to make. Whether they want Udina or Captain Anderson to be the human representative in the times to come. Another major choice whose consequences won't be seen till later. But it was kind of them to ask me, wonder how the council's doing though. Oh wait, yeah, I killed them. As a whole, I think that Mass Effect weaves an epic James Bond in space tale. The Reapers are terrifying up till the very end. Being able to defeat Sovereign cheapens the Reapers a bit in my opinion. A better ending might have been to somehow counter-engineer the Citadel to send Sovereign back into deep space. The impact of a lot of major choices is also just not apparent. I'm hoping that these choices will hold some weight in the later games. I do have some confidence because I know that some smaller side quests are referenced in Mass Effect 2 at least. I would have liked to see more side questing to the crew because the few that were there were a lot of fun. The crew is probably my favorite part of Mass Effect anyway. They serve as a reminder that the species you're dealing with are more than just whatever preconceived notions you have of them. The problem is, of course, that Liara and Tali are more or less just used to tell you about the distinctive qualities of their races. In fact, all races have defining qualities except humans. Their sole motivation in this title seems to be to get a spot on the council, and even that is mostly only Odina's goal. And honestly, having lived with humans for about 20 years now, I understand the anti-human sentiment rather well. I don't think I need to go into why assigning stereotypes to whole races of people isn't the best idea, but at least the game plays on it by allowing you to recruit what is essentially a gang of misfits. On that note, I don't get how so many people complain of politics in video games when a minority character is so much as mentioned in passing, but not when something like Mass Effect literally draws parallels to real life issues. It's almost like we're afraid of dealing with reality, but are okay with truths being told to us in subversive or sugar-coated ways. I might be onto something here. But wait, video games. Mass Effect has been credited with, or accused of, making the dialogue wheel a mainstay in action RPGs. This sort of streamlined dialogue tree shows you the Cliff's Note version of whatever your character is actually going to say. And as you can imagine, this leads to some misunderstandings. For example, I didn't mean to stab the reporter on the Citadel, I just wanted her to back off. Satisfying as it was to watch, I wouldn't have chosen that option had I known Shep was going to smack her senseless. Mass Effect simplifies the decision-making process by giving you two broad options, Paragon and Renegade, and a middle neutral option. Using Paragon dialogue choices gives you Paragon points, which unlock more extreme Paragon dialogue choices in certain scenarios, and the same applies to Renegade. And I think that this description of the morality system exemplifies its biggest flaw. Maybe this next sentence will make it even more clear. It's not exactly obvious what Renegade or Paragon means. It's highly situational. Sure, you can generally say that Paragon is morally correct and Renegade is morally dubious, but when Paragon sometimes means that you're a space racist and Renegade often means that you just don't like authority, the lines become blurred, but the morality points don't take this into account. This is less of an issue than it may seem, but that's only because there's a much bigger flaw at play. The Renegade and Paragon choices that are linked to points are often just two different ways of saying the same thing. In the final Saren confrontation, both choices just make Shepard reiterate that Saren is a pawn, and it's just the politeness with which Shep talks to Saren that changes. A lot of the time, your renegade actions will not have the dire consequences that you would expect. This just serves to show you how arbitrary these actions actually are. But since the game has more meaningful choices than in any other non-narrative driven game that I have played before, I can't fault the system that much. This just makes your character less of a contrarian badass shepherd and more of an abuse of authority shepherd. For example, you would think that you would be reprimanded for KOing a reporter, but beyond some announcements in the elevator, it doesn't really hurt your reputation much. After I did that, one woman even asked me if she should get gene therapy for her unborn child. Are you sure you want to put such an important decisions in the hands of a man who potentially has intermittent explosive disorder, woman? But since I'm not the biggest RPG fan, I don't think I'm in the best position to criticize the choices and morality system in any meaningful way beyond what I've already said. But Mass Effect isn't a pure RPG, it's an action RPG, and I am a big action game fan. And you don't even need to have played too many action games to be able to recognize the absolute mediocrity of this game's core combat systems. Right when the game starts, you're made to choose a class. Either you can specialize in tech abilities, which allow you to make quick work of AI enemies or anyone that uses any form of tech, combat abilities, which allow you to be more proficient with guns and basically kamikaze your way through the game, or biotic abilities, which give you a slew of psychic powers. Combinations of these are also possible, but I chose to go down the pure biotic route. Might seem like a bad idea, but you also have squad mates whose abilities can complement your own. That's why Tari, a tech specialist, was a mainstay in my squad. All of this seems interesting, and molding your character to your will adds to the RPG nature of the game. Choosing suitable squad mates adds a tactical layer to the combat, but this layer is basically limited to this choice. Mass Effect is nothing if not ambitious, and the combat systems reflect this. But while the game juggles all of its different hats really well from an RPG and story standpoint, the tactical shooter power based combat doesn't fare quite so well. For one, the shooting just doesn't feel good, particularly early on in the game. Shotguns and sniper rifles are weighty, but pistols and assault rifles feel like pea shooters, while dealing hits that you would expect from these weapon classes. This leads to a weird dissonance in how well you feel the weapons should work and how they actually work. A feeling that is compounded by the laughably low early game shot accuracy that leads to tons of frustration. These things all get better as you build up your skills, but that doesn't ease the early game vexation a bit. Shepard also moves in and out of cover with the movements of a bear that just got out of hibernation, and there's no shooting from behind the cover. Cover that Shepard themselves choose, by the way. And if you ever press R2 to take inaccurate shots from a safe space, you'll just end up taking inaccurate shots while also being as conspicuous as the bear whose movement Shepard imitates. The best strategy is to stay just slightly behind the cover, without using it in the way the game wants. It allows you to get shots out at a higher rate and dodge enemy fire with more ease. An even better strategy that you can use against smaller humanoid enemies is to just rush them and hit them with a melee attack. This throws them to the floor and you can finish them off before they have a chance to get back up. In the final missions, the lack of gravity makes them fly off if you do this, which is hilarious. The gunplay just feels really slow, not because of the movements alone, but also because whenever you want to use an ability, you need to open the ability radial, which pauses the game, select the ability, and then close the radial. Plus, your shields recover when you don't take damage, so you will just have to remain in cover for egregiously long periods of time if your health is low and you don't have any Medigel. This is made even worse by the fact that your guns don't have ammo. No, just like your last PC build, if you use them too much they overheat, and you need to wait for them to cool down before you can use them again. The second issue is tough to work around, and a lot of cover-based shooters do have a mechanic similar to this where avoiding damage allows you to heal, but the first one is completely avoidable. Instead of having one ability be mapped to R1, Why not allow players to have 4 abilities mapped to each of the face buttons of their controllers, accessible by holding R1 and tapping the assigned button? Sure, you would still have to issue orders to your teammates, but pausing to give tactical orders and pausing to use an ability yourself are two different things. One thing that I do like about the combat is how each ability has a separate cooldown. This incentivizes using different abilities while the ones you might otherwise lean on recharge. This isn't without fault either, owing largely to the abilities themselves. While the tech abilities are varied, they are highly situational. Used against organic life forms, they aren't that reliable for causing damage. The biotic abilities fare much better against organics, but Lift and Singularity are more or less similar, differing only in how many enemies you can send to the heavens and for how long. Stasis is my least favorite though, since it also renders an enemy immobile, but it also prevents you from causing any damage to them. Plus, you don't get to watch them transform into helium balloons. I must admit that I'm not particularly well versed in the combat abilities, but I think they might have been more useful to have on ship than any of the other squad mates, since they have very versatile use cases. I could always use guns that don't overheat and a complete immunity to any and all damage, particularly since so many enemies just decide to rush you, potentially one-shotting you on higher difficulties. Quick anecdote before we wrap up this section. I played through the entirety of the game on Insanity difficulty because I thought it was required for the platinum. Turns out, it's not. It wasn't a complete waste of time since it did end up accentuating a lot of the shortcomings of the combat, but you best believe I turned it all the way down to normal when I realized I had been torturing myself for no reason for the entirety of the main campaign. But gunplay is only one part of the equation. The game also gives you ample opportunities to go around and explore the Milky Way galaxy. Unfortunately, this is much less enticing than it may sound. The stories of the side quests make or break the enjoyability of the exploration, because at its core, it is extremely bare bones. You command the Normandy to visit different systems and different clusters through the galaxy map. Then you tap X multiple times to open up a small description of each planet within each system and see if there are any collectibles to be harvested by tapping X once more. Or you can also land on some planets to explore them using the Mako. The Mako. So if the repeated cycle of tapping X was not repetitive enough for you, don't worry, the Mako is here to make things even more tedious. Even in the remaster, this thing still controls like baby's first scrap mechanic project. Instead of contemporary accelerate brake controls, it uses the left analog stick to control forward and backward movement. Not terrible, but not ideal. What is terrible is how you're forced to ride the stupid tank uphill when it's barely even possible to make it go the direction you want on plain terrains. Even the locations you visit in your god-awful vehicle from the deepest circle of hell are copy and paste environments that will be forcing you to take the exact same path over and over and over again, and this is mind-numbingly boring. The enemy variety is also nothing to write home about, although if you did write an email about it, Shepard would probably hack into your account and read it. Actually, I'll give the game some credit. It's much more diverse than I would have expected, but the pace at which it introduces new enemy types makes it feel shallower than it is. The worlds also feel dead. There's little flora and fauna to speak of, and the animals that are there just walk in circles, waiting for you to accidentally run them over with the Mako. It was an accident, I swear. Apart from the identical internal environments, the map of each uncharted planet is also the most square shape, a rectangle. You just walk around in circles, desecrating corpses or interacting with singular objects or killing the Thrasher Maws. One of these things is not like the other. The Thrasher Maws force you to use the Mako as an offensive tool, and yeah, some story missions also require this, but the Thrashers have a ridiculously high damage output and the maneuverability, or lack thereof, of the Mako just isn't adequate for dealing with them. The best tactic I found was to stand in place till the Thrashers shot bile at me and then move to avoid it. Even though there are very few Thrashers to fight, the sheer tedium of these encounters makes them an absolute chore. But if you toil through all of this, you are rewarded for your efforts with lore and equipment. Tons and tons of equipment. You will spend as much time in menus marking the equipment as trash as you will spend on the battlefield. Once you've decided which weapons you're going to stick to, which will largely depend on the class you belong to, the absolute metric ton of equipment you get will be largely meaningless. There is so little actual variety within weapon classes that the lack of an automated inventory optimization system seems like an egregious oversight. You can't even mark items as trash when you first acquire them. No, You have to open the equipment menu no matter what. So much of my time was spent just finding the weapons with the best stats and marking the rest as trash. The only saving grace are the weapon mods, which have the potential of substantially altering use cases of the weapons, but the game gives too many of the same ones out too frequently. Another gaping omission is that the game doesn't seem to tune the loot to better suit the needs of your party. Even though Tali was a mainstay on my team, I think I got a total of 2 pieces of Korean armor, and I had to purchase those from merchants. While we're on the topic of merchants, the fact that you have to listen to the same few lines of dialogue multiple times over whenever you want to see their wares when they have more than one subcategory in their stores is just silly. Another major issue with exploration and quest completion in this game is how the quest markers are handled. For one, when you complete a quest, the game just leaves the quest marker on the map, which means that to ensure that you interacted with the right thing, you'll have to go to the journal and see if the quest is still listed as active there. Contextualizing completion of quests isn't that hard, but this game misses the mark entirely. Another issue is that quest markers do not show up on the HUD, and I know that many see a lack of objective markers as a paragon of immersion in modern gaming, but I'm a renegade who prefers a clustered HUD to an afternoon spent walking in circles. This issue persists when you're using the galaxy map, because the locations of specific missions are not marked and you have to open the main menu, open the journal, locate the quest you're trying to follow, and then remember which system the corresponding planet is in. You might say that this was done to increase immersion, but that is a bullshit argument since the locations associated with the main quests are so clearly marked. Allowing players to set one active quest and then marking the relevant location on the galaxy map would just serve to reduce frustration. The level design as a whole requires you to backtrack very frequently as well. This game definitely shows its age in the gameplay department, and I would highly recommend that you do yourself a favor and play on easier difficulties to reduce the persistent annoyances. The version of the game I played was the PS4 Remaster, Mass Effect Legendary Edition. Before I tear this remaster to shreds, I do want to acknowledge that all the textures look absolutely phenomenal, and there are many complaints that I have with this game, such as the tell not show nature of some side quests, or the fact that the game shepherds you through corridor after corridor, or even the bad AI to some extent, that would require a fundamental reworking of the game's systems to add or alter content. However, the same excuse cannot be applied to what appear to be glaring oversights that would require substantially less effort to fix. And even when they would require effort, the effort would have been worth it, as it would make the experience more palatable as a whole. There are a slew of bugs and glitches that I ran into that took me out of the experience constantly. Whether it was the weird camera angles during cutscenes, the fact that a wall appeared out of nowhere when I was exploring and forced me to reload a save, the weird glitch which caused Ashley's lip movements to correspond with Caden's dialogue, which played even though he wasn't on my party, the jittery movements that Shepard would have whenever he walked close to a wall, or the time I got stuck in a door that closed automatically which also forced me to reload a save, or the multiple instances on which I got sniped through a wall. I ran into some technical issue or the other in every single one of my play sessions. Smoothing out bugs is only one part of the problem. If you're selling a remaster of the game that came out over a decade ago, I think that you've had more than enough time to fix some smaller issues to actually remaster the game and not make it as obvious of a cash grab. Case in point, the checkpointing system. Autosave is integrated into the game, but it is very unreliable. This one time, I explored an entire planet before running into a Thrasher Maw and being blown to bits. The game saved none of the progress, and I had to do the same mind-numbingly boring tasks over again. Some small indication for when the map is updated or an objective has been completed could also be added. Another really minor change that would have gone a long way in reducing the hassle associated with a lot of this game's systems would be changing the Simon Says mini-games that you have to complete over and over again. It doesn't matter if you're surveying minerals, decrypting logs, or even engaging in necrophilia, you have to play the exact same minigame. Would it really be so hard to have like 3 different minigames, one for each task, or to just remove the minigame entirely from the item containers to reduce the tedium? What makes this worse is that there are some unique minigames that are only used in one specific context, which could easily have been repurposed for some of these other tasks. In fact, the Simon Says minigame is so all-pervasive that it's also used in a high-stakes mission where you have to defuse a literal nuke. What better way to tank the stakes than to force me to play a children's game? Even if you fail a bypass, there are no real consequences. You just have to play the same game again. In Kingdoms of Amalur, you are penalized for failing minigames by being inflicted by some or the other status effect. In this game, you can just keep trying over and over till you finally get it. A lot of these issues may not seem like a big deal, and they aren't, but when I saw the cards for each game in the launcher being reflected in the helmet, I thought I could expect that attention of detail in all parts of the remaster. Instead, it just seems like they made a few major changes while overlooking all of the smaller things that needed to be fixed. And this adds up over time to make the remaster feel underbaked, irrespective of how shiny it looks. The last thing I will cover is the DLC. I just want to treat it as the afterthought it was. The Bring Down the Sky mission sets an interesting premise. Terrorists have activated propellers on an asteroid and it is headed towards a human colony. Shepard must deactivate the propellers and come to the aid of some hostages on the asteroid itself. Now, I could mention how you can start this mission and then run off and save the galaxy and then come back and the asteroid has still not reached its target, but I can't really complain about ludonarrative dissonance in video games because, well, it's a thing. Like I said though, the premise is quite high stakes, even though the plan seems better fit for a despicable me villain. What makes this vignette more interesting is that the terrorists belong to a non-council race that we haven't really had a chance to interact with yet. Don't get your hopes too high though, because the interactions with the Batarians are not very interesting to begin with, and they aren't given any time to properly explain their motivations. I hate to think that people paid real money for such little additional content, but since it's part of the Legendary Edition now, you might as well play it. You won't be missing much if you decide to skip it though. With one of the best stories in all of video game history, an iconic protagonist whose personality you can shape, and with some actually meaningful choices to be made, it's easy to see why the first Mass Effect game is video game royalty. Take your rose-colored glasses off, however, and the deeply flawed gameplay mechanics of the original, only some of which are smoothed out by what is a mediocre remaster at best. And you can see how much of a mixed bag the first entry into the series actually is. But the fact that I, a guy who values gameplay over everything else, sat at the edge of my seat for the 25 hours I spent with this game, reading through codex entry after codex entry to deepen my understanding of the lore of Mass Effect, says something about the quality of the narrative. And so does my readiness to get started with the next title as soon as I possibly can. So that's the end of my Mass Effect 1 review. I tried to divorce the shortcomings of the remaster from those of the main game as much as I could in the script, but I wanted to talk about my experience with the game as I played it in 2022, and there are a lot of things in this first one that just haven't held up to the test of time. I will be making videos on both sequels as well, and then I think I will compile a supercut of the critiques and add some of my overall thoughts on the series as a whole to round things up. Subscribe if that sounds interesting, and thanks for watching. Have a good one.